is Lauren Hudak. I'm a senior at Seaholm High School, and the name of my big board is The Real Price of the United States Intervention in the Middle East. 654,965 Iraqis have lost their life as a result of the Iraq War. 21,000 civilians are estimated to have died as a result of the war in Afghanistan. 20,000 to 50,000 civilians are estimated to have died as a result, 20,000 to 50,000 civilians have been slaughtered in Pakistan. In terms of U.S. casualties, over 6,000 American soldiers have lost their lives in the Middle East, and 1 million have been wounded, in addition to the 2,753 American civilians killed in the terrorist attacks that occurred on September 11, 2001. This isn't counting the multitude of American civilian casualties that have occurred as a result of the Islamic terrorist attacks, such as the U.S. Embassy bombings of 1993 and 1998, the Boston Marathon bombing of 2013, and the World Trade Center bombing of 1993. Why are these important? They prove a very obvious, very oft-repeated fact that we know, that there is huge ongoing conflict between the Middle East and the U.S., and it cannot be ignored. So I've sought to kind of research this. I sought to look into this because I know how important it is to our society today, to our society in the future, to our country, to our world. So I'm first going to talk a little bit about why I think the relationship between, or why I think the conflict between these two countries is unique when looking at this versus other conflicts. And that's that there's obviously social distrust as a result of the conflict that goes on between these two countries, and that's something that happens between most countries. However, the social distrust that occurs between these two countries is different because it is not just a result or a byproduct of the war, it actually helps to fuel the war. And this can kind of be seen in the form of terrorist attacks. They are brought on by social distrust, they are brought on by political viewpoints, and they have actually transformed the war between the U.S. and the Middle East in ways that nothing else could have. So this kind of brings me to my thesis, which is that the widespread conflicts that exist between the U.S. and some parts of the Middle East have transitioned from being rooted in political necessity to being fueled by ideological differences and social distrust as a result of past political action. So I'm going to kind of talk a bit about a brief history of foreign policy, the U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East, and this is 50 years of history that I'm going to try and cover, and I obviously can't do it. I only have 20 minutes, so I'm just going to talk about 2 or 3 major events, and these are by no means the biggest events that have occurred between these two countries in the latter half of the 20th century, or the most influential or the most deadly. They are just, I just chose a couple of events that I thought helped most to characterize the early political action between these two regions. So first I want to talk a little bit about the official recognition of the State of Israel in 1947 by the UN. And so I'll talk later in my presentation about the Israeli-Palestine conflict. However, I did want to bring up the recognition of the State of Israel now just because it really helps. It was one of the earliest huge political moves that the U.S. made in the Middle East, and recognizing the State of Israel was a huge deal just because before that it had not officially been recognized, especially by countries in the Middle East, many countries in the Arab League, which still don't recognize it today. And so once again, I'll explain and kind of summarize more the Israel-Palestine conflict later, but this just helped set the U.S. up in a negative light right from the get-go. And obviously, we had a lot of interference between the two regions before that. However, this was one of the biggest first steps. And so I'm then going to talk a little bit about the U.S. foreign policy under President Dwight Eisenhower, because he obviously after World War II, Middle East started becoming a huge hot topic in U.S. foreign policy. President Dwight Eisenhower recognized it as a very influential region, as it had such a huge amount of the world's population. And so he started with the Iranian coup d'etat of 1953. Prime Minister of Iran, Mohammad Mossadegh, sought to nationalize Iran's oil production, and which was then owned by the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, which was owned by Britain. So Mohammad Mossadegh sought to nationalize it, and Britain called upon the U.S. for help in this issue, and so the U.S. helped to stage a coup d'etat in Iran, which put leadership in charge, which was sympathetic to European oil interests, so they did not end up nationalizing oil production in this country. And there are many reasons why America is cited to have participated, mostly just because we were allies with Britain as a result of World War II. However, since then, it's been said that Eisenhower's administration was weary of nationalism in the Third World, and as always in the 50s, there was a fear of spreading communism. So any nationalism in the third world was to be feared during this time. And the Middle East, obviously, Eisenhower was almost scared of it in a way, just because of the amount of potential that it had to control the world politics. So this event set a very, very important precedence in U.S. foreign policy, and that's that the U.S. was willing to disrupt the political order of a foreign country in order to further its own agenda, which was an example of strategic political action at its very finest. And this happened again with the Suez Crisis of 1956. And this was an Egyptian president, Nasser, sought to nationalize the Suez Canal Company, which was duly owned by Britain, France, and Israel at the time. And so President Eisenhower was hoping to prevent the Soviet Union from coming to Egypt's aid, which they had offered to do previously. So Eisenhower established the Eisenhower Doctrine in the Middle East, which was that any country could request American economic assistance and/or aid from U.S. military forces if it was being threatened by armed aggression from another state. So this doctrine set a very important precedent for U.S. foreign policy, which, to put the sentiment in Beauchamp's words, it was now officially America's job to police the Middle East. So this is a very general statement, but once again, in the interest of time, I'm just going to go for it. After this political intervention, certain extremist elements in the Arab world began to organize against American interests globally. The deep distrust between these two nations can be illustrated by a visual. So this was a poll that was taken going all the way from 1999 to 2014. And I'm going to kind of summarize the results just from 2014 because it's the most recent and because the most amount of information is available. But as could probably be expected, the main players in the Middle East, Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, Turkey, and others, gave America some of the lowest favorability ratings out of any other country. Seriously. We scored usually above the 50th percentile in most countries, France, Germany, Greece, Italy, most of the countries in Europe, every country in Asia, all the countries in South America, besides, as an exception, Cuba, because the Cuban Missile Crisis of the 50s. But however, we scored above the 50% mark. However, in the countries in the Middle East, we can be seen continually getting below the 50% mark. Sometimes as low as 10% in Egypt. And so this serves to prove a very important point that there is and was and will always probably be social distrust between these two nations, between the Arab world and the U.S. And so there are many different reasons that could be cited for the social distrust. There are social tensions. There's propaganda, there's just general view, there's differences in ideology. However, after doing a lot of research, it seems to be that the main reason cited for social distrust of Arabs towards Americans is two major political events, which is the Iraq War and the Israeli-Palestine conflict. In response to the Iraq War, a majority of Iraqi respondents in a poll taken in 2012 say that the impact of the war has been negative with respect to their personal safety and security. And this was reported by 72% of those that were polled, which is just a whopping number. It's a huge number of people that believe that the Iraq War negatively impacted their lives. And this was never supposed to be the goal of the Iraq War. It was not supposed to be to negatively damage the lives of citizens. However, over 100,000 lost their lives in the Iraq War. And this has definitely taken its toll on the social relationship between the Arabs and Americans. And so, also the Israeli-Palestine conflict puts us at huge odds with many of the most influential members of the Arab League. And for those of you, I'm going to give a really, really brief description of it. I know we learned about it in Flux, we went over it, so at least half the room knows what I'm talking about. The other half you've probably seen or heard or know what's happening based on the media, the news. It's a huge political hot topic right now. So, however, the Israeli-Palestine conflict has been going on for many, many, many years. And it can be defined by the belief of Palestine and many other countries in the Arab League that Israel is illegally, unlawfully, has no right to the land that they're occupying. And so Palestine is calling for the complete evacuation of all Israelites from Israel and a return of the land. And Palestine is now occupying some areas in Israel, the Gaza Strip, and other related territories. And so there's conflict between the two regions. The Palestinians want the Israelis out, and the Israelis want to stay. So there is much conflict between these two regions, and most of the members of the Arab world, because Palestine is mostly an Arab nation state, whereas Israel is Jewish. Many countries in the Arab world align themselves with Palestine's interests, and so the U.S. has publicly allied itself with Israel, which has put us at odds with many countries in the Arab League, definitely. And it can be said that members of the Arab world have made it very clear that any country that publicly supports and defends Israel in its fight to stay alive has declared itself anti-Islamic. So anti-Islamic is a huge, huge overarching term that is pretty much, it describes the entire, what one country thinks there, or what one region thinks of an entire culture. And so this is, words like this, anti-Islamic, Islamophobia, which many of you might have heard, they're very, 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 very detrimental to the social relationship between our two regions. So they get thrown around a lot, and they mostly go to summarize how members of the Arab world believe that members of the American world feel about them. So that's anti-Islamic, Islamophobia. So anyway, so these two events, the Iraq War, the Israel-Palestine conflict, as well as just 50 years of political intervention in the Middle East, serve to ignite just many extreme or sparks of anger in the U.S. or in the Middle East, which can be kind of seen as in a manifestation from terrorist attacks that occurred in the latter half, mostly towards the end of the 20th century and prior to 9/11, which you see the April of 1983 with the bombing of the U.S. Embassy in Beirut, Lebanon. This was carried out by the Islamic Jihadist Organization. The World Trade Center bombing of February 26, 1993. The Kenya and Nairobi dual simultaneous U.S. Embassy bombings, which occurred in 1997. And the 2000 attack on the USS Cole in Yemen. So many Islamic fundamentalist groups are to blame for these attacks. However, leading up to the end of the 20th century, most of them can be traced back to Osama bin Laden and his terrorist group Al-Qaeda. So near the end of, or with each of these attacks, Al-Qaeda gained more sympathizers and became more influential in the Middle East, and was able to gather enough resources to commit what was inarguably the most heinous terrorist attack to occur on American soil, which is the bombing on September 11, 2001. So in history, in my paper, in my presentation, 9/11 marks kind of a turning point for U.S. Middle Eastern relations. So before 9/11, U.S. intervention was generally to solve political disputes between formal governments, to settle political disputes, first as strategic political action. However, prior to 9/11, we entered into the War on Terror, which was an ideological war. So the War on Terror, in studying the relationship between these two countries, is relevant to examine how the average American citizen's perceptions of the Middle East and its inhabitants stood after 9/11. And so there is a poll here done by the Pew Global Research Group, which polls American favorability ratings towards Arabs, and it generally, in most ways, reflects how Arabs feel towards Americans. Once again, we gave Arabs the lowest favorability rating out of any other culture or ethnic group. We gave them favorability ratings below 50%. Okay. Go.
I'll wake you up.
Go. Mom, God, I have to start the whole thing now.